Let's see if this still works.
That doesn't do any good. That won't stop us.
Look at that. Got them all on now.
Does that mean take a nap?
Excuse me?
Does that mean to take a nap?
Some people can nap in the daylight.
You're right. Yes, I can.
Remember, that's how they used to do it in the auditorium. And all of them silence. Doesn't work in here that way, does it? Good morning, everybody. Welcome to March, a new quarter, a new teacher. You got not just 13 weeks of me, you got 14 weeks of me. Yes, I busted the deacons.
Let's file out this door right here.
And for the record, I have put Dan Jones in charge of my love offering. So give your gifts to him. He's going to keep an administrative fee and pass the rest along to where it needs to go. Right, Dan?
Yes, sir.
I guess we ought to start getting serious. A couple of three announcements, and then we'll open the floor for prayer requests. I have a flyer up here for the Valley and Furnace Men's Conference, which is an all-day 8 to 5 event next Saturday. I think they announced today that 80 some odd people had signed up for that, but there's still plenty of room. Also, please announce, please join us for Ladies' Night. Guest speaker is Jan Pruitt, the Gift of Family, March the 12th at 6 p.m. here in the reception room. Ladies can sign up on the Ladies Ministry Bulletin Board or on the church app. Okay, I had those two things up here. And also it was told to me today, some of you may know or may not know about Rick Franks is having heart surgery tomorrow, some perforation in the heart that needs to be repaired, and he's going to be undergoing surgery for that tomorrow. So keep Rick in our prayers. Any other prayer requests this morning? No?
Jane Anderson that's in the hospital. We need to remember her.
Jean Anderson.
Some people will remember Stan Tumlin.
Stan
Tumlin, long time.
Tumlin.
At Homewood Church of Christ.
At Homewood.
And he has died, and I believe his funeral will be Saturday, if I'm correct.
Anyone else? All right, join me in prayers. We go to the Father, please. Eternal Father, you are the one, the true, and the living God, the God of our salvation and the rock of our strength. Father, we come to you in prayer, thanking you for who you are, thanking you for what you have done for us, thanking you, Father, for this day of life and all of its marvel, all of its amazement, all of its beauty, Father. Everything we are, everything we have, and everything we hope to be. Truly, they're all gifts from you, Father. Father, you've heard the names of several here that have been lifted up as needing prayers for themselves or their families, Father, and for each one mentioned, we know there are a dozen that for each of us that were not called, Father. But we know you're with each of your children. We know that all things work together for good for those who love you, and we just ask you, Father, to be with those who need your help so badly. Father, thank you for this time to come together and study from your word, Father, for the lessons we can learn. And Father, I hope we can take those lessons and not just nod to them intellectually and say, yes, that sounds good, but Father, to really eat the words and have them become part of us and guide our lives, Father, for your words indeed are life. Father, thank you for all is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. All right, as you can see on the screen, we are going to be looking this quarter at the book of Joshua. looking at what God has spoken to us through Joshua. I use that phraseology because so many times we talk about, excuse me, Alan.
Could you turn the volume down just a
Well, I asked if it was okay, but
We were busy talking.
that's where I got rocking and rolling, huh?
Yeah, it's already deafened me in this ear, so I really can't hear you.
You'll find I'm a compliant teacher. Oh, let's see, which one's the master? No? Is that better?
Better for us.
Yes,
I'm sorry?
Yes, we can hear you.
Too low?
Okay,
There.
Right there? Huh?
say that.
speak.
I just don't want y'all to go to sleep back there.
We're not.
All right. It's still too loud. I tell you,
Just move the mic a little.
Still too loud.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you're
maybe if I just try to move that away a little bit, is that better?
yeah,
Maybe if I don't talk so loud?
right.
All right, I'll try to accommodate. We were fixing to say, so often we speak of what Paul wrote, or what Matthew wrote, or what John or Peter or Isaiah or Moses wrote, but in actuality it is not those men who wrote, but it was God writing through his human servants, and that is a difference because if you look at the entirety of the Bible, you've got to come to the conclusion that the words that we have could not have come from human minds, even the minds of godly men. Some of the precision of the prophecies and the types and the antitypes are such that they had to come from another source outside of man. We recognize, understand, and acknowledge that as God. So we are looking at the words that God gave us through His servant, through His servant Joshua. So one of the first things we might ask is, why study Joshua? This was so long ago, so many names and places and things that are hard for us to grasp sometimes. What is the purpose of studying Joshua? One of the first things we think about is look at the book of Joshua as being a bridge. Think about the book of Acts. If we didn't have the book of Acts, we would go directly from the crucifixion, burial, and resurrection and ascension of Jesus into the apostolic letters. And if we're reading through from John, the end of John to Romans, one of our first questions might be, who is this Paul? Where did he come from? Wait, there's a church in Rome? In Corinth? In Philippi? How did those get here? The book of Acts is a bridge from the times of Christ, showing us the early church and filling in these gaps, so to speak. Without it, we might say, well, wait a minute. At the end of Deuteronomy, the children of Israel are there on the east bank of the Jordan River, and now we're into the Judges, and wait a minute. How did they get there? What happened? So the book of Joshua is a bridge taking us from the wilderness into the land of Canaan and all that happened, so that we don't have to grope for the answers ourselves. We also see, by having the book of Joshua, how God proved himself to be faithful to the promises that he had made to the children of Israel, even the promises going back to the patriarchs. I'm sorry? Oh. The patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, so many centuries earlier, he's still faithful. We find that faithfulness here in the book of Joshua. If we did not have the book of Joshua, we would be missing, if you want to call it, the founding of the nation of Israel, that people, that nation that was the Old Testament type of the church, comprised of God's chosen people in that day, the physical descendants of Abraham through Isaac and Jacob. These were the people who were heirs to the promises made to the patriarch, and Joshua tells us of the founding of that nation of Israel that we would read about throughout the rest of the scriptures. Now I'm up to date. Number 4, we would miss some of the foundational events and decisions that in a very real sense impacted the entire history of the nation of Israel. Now, I know a lot of you have heard me tell the story about my great-great-grandfather, Chesley Hardy Cranford, how he had gone home to Oakman after the Civil War, gone back into farming, but had an encounter, a chance meeting with some traveling preachers who were coming through the area talking about this move back to the Bible only, throwing off the human creeds, the human doctrines, the human traditions that had arisen within and actually metastasized within Christianity throughout the centuries, that going back to the Bible and the Bible only was really what was expected of God's children. And Chesley, yeah, that makes sense to him, and his decision that day not only impacted his life, but it impacted the life of his daughter, Modena, and Modina's son, John, and John's daughter, Lorene, and Lorene's daughter, Barbara, and Barbara's son, me. So decisions that we make during our lifetime will flow down to generations even yet unborn. Sometimes, if it's for better or for worse, it still flows down. And we're going to see that here at work in some of the things we look at in the book of Joshua. Things that happen, decisions that are made or not made, are going to have tremendous impact. And we're not going to just stop at Joshua and some of these. We're going to look as it flows through to the times of the judges, the times of the kings, even in the New Testament times, even to the book of Revelation. So, the book of Joshua has some things that we can learn from in that respect as well. We would miss, if we did not have Joshua, accounts of the supernatural. We do find the supernatural in the writings given through Joshua. Now, of course, Bible enemies will scoff at the supernatural, but as believers, we receive them as fact. It may not be something that we can test empirically. It may be something that challenges our minds, but still, as we go through the scriptures and we look at the things that we can investigate, can test, can compare and reason, and find them to be true, it's impossible for an honest mind who accepts the rest of Scripture as true to dismiss the supernatural as myth or legend or fabrication. And we're going to see that events of the supernatural here in the book of Joshua. And maybe we would miss some examples of human nature. There are two things that haven't changed from the beginning. One is God's nature, and the second is human nature. And we're going to see rising up in the book of Joshua, sometimes for the better and sometimes sort of ugly, the old human nature that we can learn from. And not just things that are interesting, but things that are relevant, even vitally relevant for us today. We find those in the book of Joshua. So I hope it's going to be an interesting and insightful and beneficial study to look at what we have written through Joshua. Thoughts or comments so far? While I take a sip of coffee. No? All right, we'll start with a question. Do you know any of these people? If you do, raise your hand. Don't call it out, but raise your hand if you know any of these people. Phil Bingston, Hunk Anderson, Billy Kennard, Bill Russell, Jim Dooley. Raise your hand. Know any of them? Yeah, a few. I figured a handful would know one or two of them. Bring it a little bit closer to home. Anybody know Doug Barfield or Ray Perkins? Yeah. Who are these people?
Some of the greatest of all time.
Oh, listen to him. We have got coaches who followed a legend. Phil Bingston, Vince Lombardi, Hunk Anderson, Newt Rockney, Billy Kennard, Johnny Balk, Bill Russell, Red Auerbach, Jim Dooley, George Hallis, and of course, following down there at the bottom, Shug Jordan and Bear Bryant. So each of them following that legend defined in both the terms of longevity and success they had in their professions. Now, there are certainly instances where we can find in sports and in other arenas as well, a successor to a legend who had success. I think maybe of Jimmy Johnson with the Dallas Cowboys, who followed Tom Landry. He made a measure of legendary results himself. Who was the other one I had? Oh, Tommy Lasorda with the Dodgers, who followed Walt Alston, who had a stellar career with the Dodgers. But by and large, is it easy to follow a legend? No. You're always in the shadow of that legend. You're always being compared to that legend. Your results are always saying, or your followers, people you're in charge of, are always saying, but so and so would do it this way. So and so had this success. It's not easy at all to follow a legend. But that's what we're going to be, what Joshua had. Joshua was following a legend. What a bigger legend is there in the Old Testament than Moses, who, by following God's instruction, freed the Hebrews from slavery in Egypt, led them out of Egypt, and then for those 40 years led them through the wilderness, giving them the law, and on and on and on. Big shoes to follow. So what do we know about Joshua from the Torah? I thought before we got into the text of the book of Joshua itself, we'd go back and look. Joshua didn't just burst on the scene in Joshua 1:1. He also, I think we all know one or maybe two or three times where we find Joshua in the Torah. But I thought it might be good to go back and look at what we know about him and what is said about him in the first 5 books of the Old Testament. First thing we know is that he was from the tribe of Ephraim, that half tribe that was descended from Joseph. We know that he was born into slavery in Egypt. We know that he was part of the Exodus story. He saw himself the plagues, experienced that first Passover, was there with the Israelites leaving Egypt when Pharaoh allowed it. He saw the pursuit of the Egyptian army after Pharaoh had changed his mind about these slaves that he had released. He saw the parting of the Red Sea. He walked through on dry ground. He saw the destruction of the Egyptian army behind him by those same waters. He was part of the Exodus story. And we think he was probably about 40 years old at the time of the Exodus. We know that Caleb, the other, if you want to call it faithful spy, was 40 years old, or plus or minus right there at the Exodus. And there are several reasons, a couple of stories we're going to even touch on today. One, that Moses appointed Joshua to assemble a fighting force to go out against the Amalekites. I don't think he would have chosen a wet behind the ears 20-something-year-old to have that charge. Another one is that event we know about sending the spies into the land of Canaan. Again, you'd think it would be somebody with a little more experience, a little more maturity than, say, a 20-something-year-old would be. And it makes it more likely that he was probably about 40 years old at the time of the Exodus. Like I say, some scholars will conjecture that he was maybe in his 20s But we're going to go with this as, I think, a better guess. Anything before we move on? We're going to start looking at the passages where we find him in the Torah. Right. Exodus 17, I mentioned a minute ago, the battle against Amalek. We see in Exodus 17 the Hebrews have left Egypt. They've escaped through the Red Sea. We've already seen them start to grumble. First of all, about not having water. That was at the place called Marah, where God turned the bitter waters into sweet, drinkable water. Then we found them grumbling about not having meat. Food. So God provides them manna, and even not having meat, He gives them quail. Then there's another grumbling at the waters of Meribah, and again, having no water at Meribah, and that's where God commands Moses to strike the rock, and He provides them water. And in Exodus 17:8, we find where Amalek comes out to fight against Israel. Who were the Amalekites? They were descendants of Esau. And there was, even though Jacob and Esau had reconciled, there was animosity down through the centuries between the descendants of Jacob and the descendants of Esau. Even coming down to the throughout the Old Testament, we find Edom and Israel back and forth with hostilities and animosity. Edom being the descendants of Esau. And even down to the time of Christ, Herod the Great was an Idumean, an Edomite, a descendant of Esau. And of course, he not only was vile and ruthless, the Jews hated him, loathed him. And also, notwithstanding that animosity, in this region of the southern part of the Sinai Peninsula, the Amalekites were there as a nomadic people, and it's likely that they may have seen this large congregation of Israelites as a threat to the sparse resources that were in that part of the world. And there might have even been a spark of hatred by the Amalekites against God, because it's stated in Deuteronomy 25 that the Amalekites did not fear God. And maybe they weren't going to have anything to do with His people coming through their area. In any case, we find in Exodus 17 that Moses instructed Joshua to assemble a fighting force to go out against the Amalekites. And again, going back to what I said, I think that leads me to believe he was not, again, a wet behind the ears 20-something-year-old, but he had some maturity to him, even though 20-year-olds could serve in the military. To be a leader probably required some more maturity than that. And in the Jewish economy throughout their history, it was the age of 30 that was seen as an age of full maturity and full suitable for teaching, full authority, and the like. So this battle with the Amalekites that we read about, that was the one, you'll remember the story, that as long as Moses had his hands raised, the Israelites would advance, have success. But when his arms came down, the Amalekites would gain the initiative. So this is where they put blocks under Moses' arm, and with the assistance of Aaron and Hur, Moses kept his arms raised, and Joshua and his fighters, quote, overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Now, we're not told where Moses first encountered Joshua. This is our first glimpse here of the Battle of the Amalekites as the leader of the army that with God's providence defeated the Amalekites at Rephidim. But because this occurred so shortly after leaving Egypt and his appointing Joshua to be in charge of this, it probably lends us to think that Joshua and Moses knew each other in Egypt. I lost my place. Here we go. Maybe it was the mind and the talent and probably most of all the zeal for God that Joshua had that Moses saw in him. And again, we don't know for sure, but very likely they knew each other in Egypt. Next place we find Joshua is in Exodus 24 at Sinai. It's told us there that Joshua goes up onto the mountain with Moses. But it seems that Joshua was left along the way. Only Moses ascended to the summit for the encounter with the Lord. But when they came down, and then the two of them rejoined and came down to the camp, it said it was Joshua who heard a noise, and he was confused about what this noise was. It says, quote, "There is a sound of war in the camp. It is not the sound of the cry of triumph, nor is it the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing I hear." We remember what that singing was about?
The golden calf.
It was the golden calf episode, exactly. In Exodus 33, we have it told us that apparently before the construction of the tabernacle, God would meet with Moses, appear to Moses at Moses' personal tent, a dwelling that was pitched outside the camp but seemed to be in view of the whole congregation of Israel. Exodus 33:11 tells us that the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, just as a man speaks to his friend. Think about that phrase, just as a man speaks to his friend. When Moses returned to the camp, from his tent down to the camp, his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. Doesn't tell us a reason, but maybe as a personal guard, maybe in case the Lord came back while Moses was in the camp. We don't know, we're not told, but Joshua would not depart from Moses' tent when Moses left it. In Numbers 11, there's an interesting account and instructional that we find with Joshua involved in it. In verse 18, we have the people again grumbling that they had no meat to eat, even lamenting about how well off we were in Egypt. Yeah, we were slaves, but at least our pots were full of good food. Does that tell us a little bit about human nature? Well, God promises to provide them meat, even so much they'll be sick of it. And as part of this account, Moses gathered 70 of the elders of Israel to his tent. And it's told us that the Lord came down and spoke to Moses and, quote, "He, the Lord, took of the spirit that was upon him," upon Moses, "and placed him upon the 70 elders. And when the Spirit rested upon them, they prophesied, but they did not do it again," unquote. It seems that there was some temporary gift given to these 70s, perhaps to help certify the message of the Lord to Moses. And of course, it's reminiscent of what we saw at Pentecost with the outpouring of the Spirit on the apostles. But here's the thing, there were two men by the name of Eldad and Medad who were not part of these 70 elders. But it was reported to Moses that they were out prophesying in the camp. And then in Numbers 11:26, it's written, "Joshua the son of Nun, the attendant of Moses from his youth, said, 'Moses, my Lord, restrain them.'" Make them stop. And what was Moses' reply? "Are you jealous for my sake? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord would put his Spirit upon them." Does that bring to mind anything? Remember the account of the disciples of John being jealous that Jesus was getting more followers and baptizing more than was John. And also of the apostles to be later, telling the Savior they had found a man who was casting out demons, but they had told him to stop because he wasn't one of us. In both cases, jealous zeal for their leader, John the Baptizer, and Jesus in those cases, gave rise to an indignation against those that they were sensed that were maybe a threat to the ones who followed, that were not part of our group. Was that the same for Joshua? Does it reveal a little bit of humanity in him? A little bit of human nature? Jealous of Moses to a fault, for Moses to a fault. And as a side note, what does that reveal about the meekness of Moses? Would that all of God's people prophesy? How are we doing on time? Oh, I'm not over yet. Good, I still got more stuff. Numbers 13. This is the account of God's instructing Moses to send the spies into Canaan. And Joshua was one of the 12, we know that. And we know the story about how the reports came back that, oh yes, this is a land flowing with milk and honey, bountiful harvest and beautiful land. But it's also inhabited by giants and fortified cities. There ain't no way that we can take them. That was a report from all 12 except Joshua and Caleb. Of course, we know how they said, God's going to give us a land. He'll deliver these people to us. Just don't rebel against him. And it didn't set well with the sons of Jacob, did it? They were ready to stone Joshua and Caleb. But about that time, the glory of the Lord appeared in the tent of meeting to the sons of Israel.
Class is over.
Y'all can watch me. Refresh.
Check the plug into the same.
Your plug. You hit your.
Oh,
See it again.
You stepped on it.
I know I stepped on it. I noticed that.
I was waiting for you to trip the whole time, and you didn't do that.
Well, I'm halfway there.
There you go.
Oh, is it coming up? How about that? One more click, maybe we'll have it.
There you go.
Where were we on this? The 12 spies. So anyway, the glory of the Lord, it's written, appeared at the tent of meeting, and that probably quickly turned the Israelites' attention away from stoning Joshua and Caleb. Also, in Numbers 13, we have the account of one of these famous changes of names that we find in Scripture from time to time. Simon becoming, being renamed Peter, Saul becoming Paul. Anybody remember what Joshua's given name was? Yeshua, Hoshea, Hoshea. In the Hebrew, Hoshea means salvation, and Joshua means God is salvation. The name itself points away from the man and toward God, the source of Israel's strength, its protection, its provision. And yes, that name also points to a greater Joshua that is to come later. The name Jesus in the Hebrew actually being identical to Joshua, Yeshua or Yehoshua. So again, in many cases, we'll see that Joshua, the man we're studying this quarter, is a type of the greater Joshua that's going to come some 1,500 years later.
Could you repeat that, what you just said, the change of names? I missed it. Say, repeat it. Joshua.
You want to hear me say Yehoshua again?
Yeah.
Hoshea was changed to Joshua. And Joshua in the Hebrew is the same as Yeshua or Yehoshua, which is, we call in our vernacular, Jesus.
Great, thanks.
Did I say it right?
We don't know.
If you say I did, I'll take it.
I just missed, it's a good point.
It is a good point. At least I made one today. Other thoughts or comments? Other places we find Joshua in the Torah, Numbers 32 is simply a restatement about Joshua and Caleb, that they would be the only two that would enter into the promised land. In Numbers 32, we have God instructing, Okay. In in Numbers 32, we have Moses informing Joshua and Eleazar the priest about the lands of the 2.5 tribes that would be settling on their inheritance east of the Jordan River. That would be, Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh. But also making known that provision that when the whole congregation crossed the Jordan into Canaan, that the men from these 2.5 tribes would have to join their brethren in the taking of these lands. So it shows us that Joshua was in the loop, if you will, on this and probably a lot of other things. I don't know why I left off these other two. In Numbers 20, from my slides, in Numbers 27, there is a here's where it is. In Numbers 27, there is a commissioning of Joshua, where God instructs Moses to put some of his authority on Joshua, in order that the congregation of the sons of Israel may obey him. So Joshua was a shepherd to the people, maybe even seen at that time as an heir apparent to Moses. Talked about that. Other places, when we get into Deuteronomy, the closing book of Moses, we'll just read through these real quickly because we are going to be running out of time. Deuteronomy 1:38, Joshua the son of Nun, who stands before you, he shall enter there, encourage him, for he shall cause Israel to inherit it. 3:21 and 22, I commanded Joshua at that time, saying, your eyes have seen all that the Lord your God has done to these two kings, that would be Sihon and Og, kings of the lands east of the Jordan. All that God has done to these two kings, so the Lord shall do to all the kingdoms into which you are about to cross. Do not fear them, for the Lord your God is the one fighting for you. Deuteronomy 3:28, but charge Joshua and encourage him and strengthen him, for he shall go across at the head of his people, and he will give them as an inheritance the land which you will see. Again in Deuteronomy in chapter 31, then Moses called to Joshua and said to him in sight of all of Israel, be strong and courageous, for you shall go with this people into the land which the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give them, and you shall give it to them as an inheritance. Same chapter a little bit further down in 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, behold, the time for you to die is near. Call Joshua and present yourselves at the tent of meeting, that I may commission him. So Moses and Joshua went and presented themselves at the tent of meeting. Again in Deuteronomy 31, then he commissioned Joshua the son of Nun and said, be strong and courageous, for you shall bring the sons of Israel into the land which I swore to them, and I will be with you. And finally in Deuteronomy 34, now Joshua the son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him, and the sons of Israel listened to him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. So, what we find is Joshua appearing throughout from the time they left Egypt to the time of the doorsteps of Canaan in so many different places. We see that that he was a servant, a minister to Moses. He was zealous for Moses and Moses' authority. We see him receiving instruction from God, encouragement from God about leading the people into the land, seeing him here receiving a spirit of wisdom and the authority to lead the people. Thoughts or comments?
Deuteronomy 34:9, I think what I know, spirit of wisdom reference there. That's Ruach. That's probably the Holy Spirit being discussed there, and you see it being passed from Moses by the laying on his hands to Joshua. That's the first thing I think we should be interested in. The other thing that catches me is that Moses caught a lot of flack during his time as a leader.
Oh, no doubt.
From Miriam and Aaron and a lot of folks. Everybody was always against him, but I never see anything where Joshua was anything but a willing assistant who stayed with him and learned from his mistakes and his successes and was encouraged by Moses the whole way. So it's a different relationship that enabled Joshua to become who he was.
And by the time they get to the point on the east bank of the Jordan, it's a new generation that he is leading. Not that they are a perfect generation, as we're going to see when we get into the book of Joshua itself, but a lot of the rebellious generation, the ones that had risen up and grumbled against Moses, challenged his authorities for so long, they were gone. And maybe, I've thought about this, maybe it was these people had the same human nature that their fathers and grandfathers had, but the fact of them being on the doorstep to this land made them subdue any of those kinds of human passions they had for what was in their eyes right across the river. They knew it was going to be 40 years, and they had calendars. They knew that 40 years was up. And so, yeah, they may have been more inclined to accept Joshua as opposed to the generation who longed to be back in Egypt and the generation that knew that they were going to die out there in the wilderness because of the rebellion. Others?
Joshua at this point must have been so overwhelmed with what he was taking on that when God said to him, be strong and courageous, he may have thought, okay.
You've been looking at my notes.
I'll try.
Has anybody ever been in a, let's say a job or any kind of situation where you were the assistant to someone, you were the assistant to the VP, to the department head, to the division manager, and then one day that VP or that department manager or division head leaves, dies, resigns, retires, takes another job, and they tap you and say, you're in charge now. Now, you've been the assistant for so long, but now you sit in the seat of authority. The buck stops with you. You are the one to make the decisions. You are the one that is responsible for the results. And it can be a little overwhelming, but in a business context, whether it's a private company or a public corporation, and even if you are the CEO of that public corporation, you still have oversight from above in a board of directors or an ownership or whoever in any level of the hierarchy. And Joshua still had oversight and guidance from above, and to his credit, for the most part, he listened to that oversight and that guidance, and succeeded because he did that. In fact, I don't think we have time. No, it's almost 10:15. But next week we're going to start with Joshua 1 and the first 9 verses. That's exactly what we find is encouragement. Encouragement. Be strong. Be courageous. Stay in my word. Do not turn to the right. Do not turn to the left. I will be with you. I will prosper you. God makes promises to Joshua, but there are conditions to those promises, and we're going to look at those. Thought we might have time to get to them this week, but we don't. Yeah, being overwhelmed, even with that encouragement, it's got to be humbling that now I am in charge. But think, as we finish today, think about the excitement in the camp of Israel at this time. Those 40 years of, wandering around, pulling up stakes, moving to a new place that looked just like the old place, monotony of food and drink, knowing that you're not going to be the one to enter into the land that was promised to your forebears, this time of testing. Many times the Hebrews did not pass the test, if you will, but also a time of preparation to break the slavery mindset that they had in Egypt. Teach them to rely on God, not to lean on themselves, their own strength, their own understanding. And again, sitting there looking, not literally, but close enough, that where we're going is just over that hill there. We're almost there. Would there be a little bit of a twinge of excitement about that? I think so. So anyway, that's some background to Joshua. Next week we're going to pick up with the text in that book itself and look at some things even early on in the book of Joshua that we need to pay attention to and are relevant, vitally relevant for us today. Any other final thoughts or comments before we say adios? Adios then. Thank you for being here.